Hello, I'm Toycat, and something huge is happening in the United Kingdom right now because our current party of government, the party which won a big majority at the last election, has been sinking steadily in the polls over the past 4 years to the point where now they are fighting for second place. And fighting for second place in the overall vote share is one thing, but most polls which track this onto seats will actually show that the Liberal Democrats are going to get more seats than them. This is a crazy thing to happen in a two-party system because everyone knows when the government changes, it means that the party that was opposition goes into being the party of government. This is how most two-party systems around the world works, but the UK has a bit of a weird two-party plus system, which means that even though the Labour Party is going from being the the opposition to being the government in most scenarios, the Conservative Party is likely not just going to go from government to opposition, but potentially even going into irrelevance altogether. This is something that I want to talk about because what happens when one of the two parties in a two-party system fades away? Does the right-wing voice in the UK get lost forever? Well, not exactly, and there's a really interesting parallel which has happened about 25 years ago in Canada that I want to compare this to. But first, what's happened in the UK? Looking at this graph, you can see it all right here. There are three sort of centre-right to right-wing parties. There are the Conservatives, who you would broadly define as centre-right, unless you dislike them, of course. The Reform Party, who you could broadly define as being slightly further right than that. And then you've got the Liberal Democrat Party, which is mostly centre, a little bit of centre-left, a little bit of centre-right, and so you could define them as centre-right. I think that genuinely calling them centre is the easiest way to say this, but that means that on a centre to right-wing spectrum, the sort of voters the Conservatives would like to attract, currently their voters are split three ways, 11, 16 and 20%, while the left-wing party spectrum is actually split between just parties which are achieving fairly low on the political spectrum, meaning the Labour Party is united and is going to win, whereas the Conservative Party is disunited and might fade away entirely. But what does that actually mean to do so? And I figured to talk about this, it should be worth mentioning the UK has one of the oldest Westminster systems in the world. I mean, literally the system is named after Westminster, our seat of government, and so this has actually happened a few times because the Whigs were one of the OG political parties along with the Conservatives. However, when the Whigs faded away, when they stopped being the second party, by the way, famous for being having Robert Walpole and William Pitt the Elder and a lot of the famous UK prime ministers, but when the Whigs faded away, they sort of basically became the Liberal Party. This was the second party in British politics for a very, very long time, and was kind of the, if you were to use a left-right spectrum, they were kind of the left-wing party to be the counterbalance to the right wing of the Conservatives. However, the Labour Party did eventually fade away, and eventually the Labour Party absorbed most of the ex-Liberal voters and became the Conservatives' main rival, something which is true to this day. The Labour is the biggest Conservative rival, but what happens when there's no longer a Conservative Party? The Conservative Party has basically, it's a tradition that a party which aims to conserve is usually the more stable of the two political forces in a country, but if the Conservative Party fades away from being the second biggest party, then what happens next? Well, the easy answer is to say, well, obviously, in 2029, they'll eventually regain their status as leader of the opposition, or if you're really optimistic, they'll become the government again. But if you want to have a bit more of a reality-based view, I think if it was really genuinely quite close, and the Liberal Democrats did achieve only just a couple more seats, you could maybe see a way for them to come back from that. However, that really does ignore the fact that there are two right-wing forces, and they are basically neck and neck. The Reform Party are much more populist right, and therefore are much more able to say, look, if there's two parties which are very similarly placed, neither of which are going to be the official opposition, or neither of which are the governing party anyway, you might as well vote for the one that you really want to, which a lot of right-wing voters do find appealing, which is why you can see as the Conservatives just have accepted, as it's slowly been accepted the Conservatives aren't winning, more and more voters are switching over to Reform. Some of those Reform voters, it has to be said, a lot of people simplify the political spectrum. Populism does not work on a pure left-right spectrum, which is why if we compare, say, the peak here, let's just say like 47 for the Labours versus 28 for the Conservatives, you can see that now the Reform Party has gained more than the Conservative Party has lost, meaning that some of those Conservative voters would have to have come from Labour, which has also lost some voters, but in general they take slightly more from the right than the left. And so what happens now is the interesting question, and to answer that, I figured we should look to Canada, because they have a Reform Party of Canada, or I should say they had. It ended in 2000, when fun fact, it became a brand new party, and then eventually eventually merged with the Progressive Conservative Party, which was the previous dominant force. As you might imagine, a Progressive Conservative Party is something that works really well until people say, wait, we want a real Conservative Party, which is when the Reform Party is a bit more populist conservatism, and then eventually these two ideas formed together, and then that made the Canadian Alliance the Canadian Alliance is what the Reform Party renamed themselves, and then eventually they merged with them to create the new new Conservative Party of Canada. And then that new Conservative Party of Canada, with Stephen Harper at the reins, then eventually became a party of government. It's actually kind of crazy if you look at Canadian elections, just how bad the Conservatives got wiped out there. So you can see right here, like, Progressive Conservatives, they're winning 211 seats out of 282. That is 75% of the seats. Again, the idea was that if you mix a little bit of left-wing ideology into the right-wing ideology, something which basically every governing party has to do. You have to not just govern for one side of the political spectrum, but govern for as many people as you can. But if you can mix a little bit of both sides into your politics, if you can play the center ground well, then you'll have some huge success. However, if you start to lose your base, then you might lose 169 seats. Or if you're really unlucky, you might lose, this is crazy, Kim Campbell had 156 seats, so that's out of 148 needed for majority, a majority party, and then ended up being 5th in the polls, behind the New Democrats, the Reform Party, behind the Bloc Québécois, and that is absolutely insane. Going from 1st to 5th, going from being the party of government to being basically a protest vote, and that is how bad the Conservative Party split in Canada. However, as you can see, although the Liberal Party did pretty well while the parties were split, eventually, in 2004, the merged Conservative Party becomes the second biggest party again, and in 2006, in that election, they become the party of government, which they retained for quite some time, if I'm not mistaken. It's a fairly steady time until Justin Trudeau comes onto the scene. And so with that said, that is the very, very, very interesting story of how Canada had a party that vanished, and then it kind of reformed, remerged, the voters came together, and they made a more successful Conservative Party, while at the exact same time, you'll notice, interestingly, basically the left started to split in a similar way. You can see that right here, the Liberal Party had a similar fall-off. They went from being the party of government just 5 years before, to being the party of 3rd place, whereas the New Democratic Party took over as being the 2nd place party, and the same thing has to happen where eventually, you know, someone's like, look, I am left-wing, but also I am French-Canadian, but also I am liberal, and, you know, once you can combine enough sets of voters together, that's how you win an election. At least that's I think that some people, especially if you have those more out there on both sides' opinions, you can find it to be that actually, no, there's only one correct way to govern. It's my set of beliefs exactly, and anytime anything good happens in politics, such as with reform, it's because people who believe like me are every single person. Everyone believes in reform's policies, and the only reason they don't have 100% is because of the lamestream media. You know, some people believe that. I find I'm picking on reform because they're doing quite well, and there's a lot of internet activism. They're doing really well amongst young people, which is great. But, you know, people believe that about the Green Party. Like, people would vote for Green if they just thought it would win. In Scotland, they believe the SNP will win, and that's where I want to kind of briefly touch, which is the fact that the Conservative Party probably is going to be somewhere between 2nd and 5th at this election. It's very unlikely they go much below that, and so you might be wondering, like, well, what does it take to be, like, 10th in the UK? And fun fact, here are the main parties in the UK. We've got the Alliance down here at the bottom, which is a Northern Irish only party. The same is true for the UUP, the SLDP, the SF, and the DUP. It's funny, because Northern Ireland basically has their own equivalent parties to each one. They don't perfectly work that way, but this is broadly the Labour Party. This is broadly the Conservatives, so I would really say this is closer to the Conservatives. This is broadly the Liberal Democrats, and then they have a fun new dimension to their politics, which is, do you think we should rejoin Ireland, or do you think we should stay in the UK, but, like, aggressively? And so basically, though, these are the 5 smallest parties. I mean, actually, Plaid Cymru is the same thing for Wales. These are the 6 smallest parties, and so you can actually fall bad enough if you get below 3 seats. if you get below 3 seats, you end up at the round where you don't just become the 5th largest party, but you become the 10th. However, a lot of people will then say, to be fair, if you become the 10th largest party, it's not that you're starting from the same position that Plaid Cymru are. It's not that you're starting from the same position the Green Party are, because there is one key advantage, even if the Conservatives continue to fall. And let's be honest, there's one day to go. There's not going to be some tragic thing happening. Actually, let's find out what happened. What happened in the last 24 hours? They're making the last few pitches. Labour would let prisoners out too early. That's the claim from Rishi Sunak. He's not given up on winning, so you never know. Could end up that it's a surprise result tomorrow. But the interesting point in this video is just here to say that ultimately there is one advantage that you have. The reason that, even in Canada, the reason that the Conservative Party that won had to join with the 5th place party from 1993 there, the reason that had to happen is because ultimately voters do have some amount of loyalty to a party, and there are going to be some large number of people who don't vote for the Conservatives but who still believe that that is their political home. In the same way that if the Labour Party ever splits, there are people who tribally have it built into them that they're Labour voters and they always will be. I'm a coal miner right now, but I'm doing a bad job at it, I think. And so, yeah, I guess the other thing that should be addressed here is why is it that the Liberal Democrats are in 4th? Again, I think that they are a centrist party, more or less, and so being in 4th is interesting by itself, because surely, Toycat, you say that surely being in the centre there should mean they get the most votes, but I want to describe the Liberal Democrats as to how they can come 4th, but end up being 2nd, end up being the official opposition, because that might be interesting to people not from the UK, or who don't necessarily follow politics a great deal. So here is the deal with the Liberal Democrats. They were the, do you remember this Liberal Party, the one that faded away? This is the kind of, the predecessor party to the Liberal Democrats. In 1983, if I'm not mistaken, the Michael Foot was a very left-wing Labour leader, and a lot of because the Labour Party became the catch-all party for the centre to the left wing, if you can picture a political spectrum that way, a lot of people who were left-wing joined the party, but also, who believed in national, like seizing the means of productions, but also you get people who are like, yeah, I vaguely think that we should have slightly less policing and better drug laws, or better, prison sentencing, or whatever, those sorts of things. So these people join a party together, and then when you get a very left-wing leaner, these people say, oh, this is not my home, and some of those people left to form the Social Democratic Party. The Social Democratic Party basically was meant to be the replacement to the Labour Party. It didn't do particularly well by itself, but they formed an alliance with the Liberal Party, the SDP Liberal Alliance, and that became the 3rd most popular party in the UK, so close to being the 2nd most, but because of the thing I mentioned before, where the Liberal Party wasn't that big before, and neither were the SDP, even though they got almost the same votes as the Labour Party, you can see right here that they got far fewer seats, literally 10 times fewer, despite being 2% fewer votes. This is something which is kind of working in reverse in 2025, because the Liberal Democrats have been the 3rd largest party for a while now, and so they have a bunch of support in very concentrated areas of the UK. If you look at this 2005 map, which is the most seats they've had recently, you can see, like, yeah, broad areas of Scotland, orange, not yellow. The yellow is the SNP. They control. Fun thing, but the broad areas of rural Scotland, the southwest of the UK, Norfolk, weird London seats, southwest London, but also some weird bits of inner London, and then some random pockets of constituencies around the country, places that feel like they don't broadly fit into the left-right spectrum of the country. These places vote for the Liberal Democrats, and so eventually in 2015, when the Liberal Democrats fell apart, these seats all went Conservatives. Look at those. Try and find those orange areas, and you can see very few of them now. So all of these seats went blue, but crucially, they went blue by a little bit. They went blue by, like 5%. It was great for the Conservatives, who got a majority government, but that means that as the Liberal Democrats have been fighting backwards, it means that these seats are slowly getting less and less Conservative, and so if the Conservatives, let's just imagine a world where the Conservative vote collapses. We don't have to imagine that. Then these seats, which are won by 5 or 10%, if the Conservative vote splits in half, they're going to become clear Liberal Democrat seats, which is why, even with very few votes gained, the Liberal Democrats win a bunch of seats. If they could, again, you can see 2019 they had 11.8% of the share votes, and they had 8 seats, and they're predicted to lose a little bit here, but that will still mean that they will end up potentially being, again, by averages, the official opposition. There is a caveat here, which is obviously that a lot of people, very few people are going to want to tell pollsters that they're voting Conservative. And so I would actually suspect that my most likely outcome, the thing I would bet on, is the Conservatives end up being slightly ahead. But the fact that it's probably and not a definitely is why you should be alarmed if you are a Conservative Party voter and loyalist. If you're one of those people who's like, me dad voted Conservative, I am voting Conservative, then you should be worried. By the way, one last thing, which is most people know about the regions the vote for a thing. And I've always kind of believed this isn't the case, but I saw this really convincing thing from Electoral Calculus. They are the website I've been using for this video. They seem like they do a decent job of like taking the polls and turning them into maps. I would say I have broad trust in them. And so I saw this interesting timeline where they split the UK into regions and just said in these broad regions who won. And if you go ever since 1959 or ever since 1964, there is this broad trend where more or less for the north of the country goes red and the south of the country goes blue. That obviously broke up in that sort of broke in the 1970s and 80s. But you can see that, interestingly, to win, the blue party needs to really shore up their support and then push forwards. It's almost like a military thing. And for the red to win, they need to shore up their support and head southwards. And whichever party wins is the one that makes it further south or further north. And the only interesting thing that's changed here is that as of every single party, you needed to win London to win the election. So Conservative majority, blue London, red London, blue London. Basically, every single time you win, you need to have London. That was true all the way up until 2010. And ever since then, London has become just a red stronghold too. And so now, more or less, it is the fact that in the south, these voters here are saying, yep, we've had enough of this blue party taking us for granted, trying to win these northern areas and particularly all of the areas in this Midlands of the country. They've been trying to be won over by the Conservatives. They feel betrayed. They're voting for reform, and now it's going to take a miracle to get these two sides to merge. But that's what they did in Canada, and that's, in case you think that's like some crazy pie-in-the-sky thing, that's actually what the the leader of the Reform Party has gone on record as saying. Mr. Farage says, I don't want to join the Conservative Party. I think the better thing to do would be to take it over, which is exactly what happened with the 2006 Canadian federal election, where the Conservative Party, led by the previous leader of the Reform Party, managed to take over Canada, which is absolutely fascinating. He was one of the founders of the Reform Party in Canada. He's from Western Canada, where that whole movement went down, and he became the Prime Minister of the country. And so that is an interesting thing for the future. But for now, I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Election time. It's always exciting. Thank you for watching. Second channel. Don't care. Oh, if you like politics videos with a little bit of snaz or whatever you want to call this, buy me a kebab on Patreon. I use all the money from that Patreon not to improve the quality of the editing and all those things, but instead to buy some fun drinks. I'm looking forward to doing it. So yeah, buy me a drink, buy me a kebab, buy me neither of those things. It's your choice. Just like how it's your choice to vote, please do vote. Even if you just go to the polls and you vote for nothing, if you vote for a party that isn't in your seat, vote for the Sinn Féin. They don't take their seats, but at least your vote will be registered. Or vote for other. Go write down in your box other, but don't write down which other. If you have to not vote, vote for just go in and have your thing be counted. Otherwise, people won't be wanting your vote. They won't be. If you're not voting, then your opinions don't matter to politicians, and you can argue they don't matter now, but they'll matter even less if you don't. But vote for whoever you believe should come first or second or third or fourth or fifth or whatever. You vote for what you believe in, or don't. Is that a political message saying vote for what you believe in? I think it might be. Okay, vote based on what you feel like at the time tomorrow. Yeah, that's good. Okay, bye. I'm looking forward to voting. It's gonna be fun. Get a lobster roll afterwards. There are lobster rolls in the polling booths, right?